afternoon, everyone. My name is Mrs. Mbanza, and I'm a student research assistant at CriSHET. Welcome to our seminar delivered by Prof. Su-Ming Khoo on the digital inequalities in higher education. So first up on our program is the DVC of Engagement and Transformation, Prof. Keith. Please welcome him as he does his opening welcoming.
Thank you, Sina. Fantastic, and thanks for coming, colleagues. We also have a great online audience. So friends and friends, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this hybrid seminar by our visiting professor, Su-Ming Khoo, who has been sharing a time and intellectual insight with us since 2019. We're coming a long way, including 2 COVID years as well. So Su-Ming is an associate professor and head of sociology at the University of Galway, Ireland, and the visiting professor with us. She researches, teaches, and writes about human development, human rights, public goods, development alternatives, decoloniality, global activism and learning, higher education and transdisciplinarity. She's also the co-editor with Helene Kara of Researching the Age of COVID-19, Volumes 1, Response and Reassessment, Volume 2, Care and Resilience, Volume 3, Creativity and Ethics, Volume 4, Qualitative and Digital Research in Times of Crisis. So today, Sue will be sharing work from a collaborative paper, inclusive of South African collaborators as well, published in Post-Digital Science and Education titled Understanding Digital Inequality, a Theoretical Kaleidoscope. This article is freely available as open access, so please feel free to access it. As Sue notes in the abstract for the seminar, the COVID-19 pandemic and the concomitant shift to online learning made digital inequality in education settings impossible to overlook, Dr. Bazira. So in our particular context at Nelson Mandela University, these inequalities emerged in stark ways along socio-economic lines and rural-urban divides, and yet, as the pandemic has retreated, many of the digital contingencies measures remain, often without considered critical attention, because this is how it ties in to our critical university studies project. Sue's work is thus a welcome intervention and continues the discussion began in 2022 around advancing critical university studies across Africa. We call it the ACUS Africa Colloquium that we held here at Nelson Mandela University, and she also contributed a presentation to that colloquium. The colloquium was titled Reflexive Solidarities in Techno-Rational Times, an idea that was advanced by Aslam Fattar at the University of Stellenbosch, which we then knocked together into a concept paper that argues that the depoliticization of the university as a function of techno-rationality emerges as an interplay of technological, economic, affective, and socio-cultural forces behind the veil of the present crises, and argued for the need to generate fresh questions around these matters. In this seminar, Sue will be presenting us with a fresh methodological approach to the question of digital inequalities, which she terms the theoretical kaleidoscope as a tool, to quote from the seminar abstract again, that is helpful and a critical attitude to examine the ideology of digitalism, its concomitant inequalities, and the huge losses it entails for human flourishing seems urgent. So there is a great need for us to approach this question with a very high level of criticality, of course. Although it has reached hegemonic, extent, what can say, influence in the sector already, and it's another reason for why we will have to be alert to its implications. So Sue, welcome to Mandela University. We are looking forward to your presentation and to thinking through and what the proposed approach might offer us in terms of building a university that is both transformative and responsive in terms of digital inequalities. And a special warm welcome to those attending from outside the university, both in person and online, from the ACUS Africa Network, good friends and collaborators, the Global Decenter Network, and the Human Development and Capability Association, So we have many friends and collaborators across these different networks as well. And welcome to those attending from our own university community, students, staff, and also executive members. We hope that you will find your time with us today intellectually stimulating and provocative. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much.
We are now going to dive into our seminar by Prof. Su-Ming Khoo. So, Prof, you're all yours.
Thank you, Su-Ming, for your very sweet introduction and opening the proceedings today. Thank you, Andre, for the warm welcome. Thank you to the Nelson Mandela University and the CriSHET family for welcoming me and giving me a place to stay in a network of critical friendship and learning. It's been very rich and rewarding for me to be associated with CriSHET, and for me it's a great privilege to be amongst friends and of a very critical and yet a good sense of humor as well. Very important to combine with criticality. Nothing worse than having criticality with no sense of humor. So that's actually forbidden. We ban that. Okay. So today, as Andre has generously introduced, he's actually, maybe the paper was very short now because he's introduced it so well. It's going to be on digital inequalities and what we call a kaleidoscope approach. And I'm not the only author of this. As you can see, the starting point for this talk is this mega number of author paper, and I will properly acknowledge everyone in a moment. Caroline, Laura, Warren, Swati, Ashley, Sandra, Tom, another Sandra, and also the reviewer, the editor of the journal, Peter Yandrich, and two open reviewers, Jeremy Knox and Alison Mackenzie. And we titled this long monster paper, Understanding Digital Inequality, a Theoretical Kaleidoscope. And as Andre says, we have made this an open access paper and invite everyone to freely download and share the paper and make the best use of the open access fee that we've paid. So I really specifically want to acknowledge the three open reviewers, Peter Yandrich, Jeremy Knox, and Alison Mackenzie, who are listed as collaborative authors. Very unusual. Yeah? It's part of the PDSE journal's modus operandi. And it's a very interesting way of working. So I hope to share a little bit about the process as well, and including where to after this talk and after this article. And we're considering expanding. This is already a very large article, even though it is introductory in its scope. It is twice the length of a normal article, but really what an article would be written on each facet of the kaleidoscope. And we think that might make a nice book project. But let's not run before we walk. Let's just introduce the article for now, and also to have a bit more discussion, because I know that some of my colleagues from the Human Development and Capabilities Association are also interested in this topic and will be tuning into this talk, and also some colleagues in CriSHET who have expressed an interest. So I'm going to use the article as the starting point of this talk, but maybe elaborate a little bit more on the human development and capabilities approach as well, which would be the area that, as an individual author, contributing to this collaborative project, I'll be expanding. So, as Andre set out, and as the abstract set out, the backdrop is coming out of this pandemic that still actually hasn't ended. And the fact is that it's all coming out of these books on researching and doing research and being an academic an academic teacher in these multiple crises. We can call it pluri-crises or omni-crises or multiple crises. But certainly the world of crisis has not disappeared just because we hope the pandemic has gone away. We know that more crises are going to come up. And how do we think about our new digital world? Hence our choice of the journal, Post-Digital Science and Education, which thinks about this world where technology will be all around us, but it can't be all about the technology. It's got to be about our world. So how can we respond to all the crises that were brought to the fore by the pandemic that put such a big magnifying glass on digital inequalities? And what do we mean by them anyway? Digital inequalities, how do we understand them? So we know that education was an area in which digital inequalities were specifically highly impacted. And that digital means was seen as the answer to the problem, but also a magnifying glass magnifying existing extant problems, right? So our answer is also magnifying the problems. So it's just a big prompt for us to examine and to theorize, to think more deeply, more critically, more reflectively, and more convivially and collectively about these set of omni-crises and problems that we are in and how we're going to respond. So this is a big team of people that I'm amidst. There's Caroline Kuhn at Bath Spa University, and she has contributed in the article specifically to the theories of critical realism and realist social theory, and also bringing in the tripartite theory of justice, which draws on Nancy Fraser's feminist conceptions of global justice. Myself, I have been from Ireland and Galway, bringing the human development and capabilities approach. Then our colleagues in South Africa, Laura Chernowitz, who used to be the director of the Centre for Innovation and Technologies. The director is now Sukaina Walji, very good friend, critical friend. And I had a lovely visit just a few days ago there before I came here. And Laura has contributed a section on Bourdieusian theory and practice, particularly. Another colleague, delightful colleague, Warren Lilly, also from UCT, an educational psychologist, who has drawn on Vygotsky theory, educational theory, particularly focusing on cultural historical activity theory, which sees every one of us as a creative, cultural and historical actor. So every teacher and every student as a creative actor in history, creatively combining with the past in the present, in order to create their own meanings for the future. Really important. Then Ashton Craig at Educational Development, University of St. Andrews. She has contributed a section on affective injustice. And then two Sandras, a big distance apart, but who work all the time in the virtual world. And this team, together with Tom Burns, Sandra Abiglen, who's based in Calgary, and Sandra Sinfield, who is together with Tom, based at London Metropolitan University. And they are extremely creative educational developers who are harnessing the power of creativity with technology and fun and play and art. Really exciting, brilliant work and very freeing and delightful. So they've contributed a section on Freirean critical pedagogy and digital liberation. Just listen to that word, digital liberation. Lovely phrase. Then Swati Butte, who is at University of Jagra, Lake City University, the small, and well, not small, actually, it's quite large, city of Bhopal in India, who has brought the Indian perspective through the lens of resource appropriation theory. Because the technology is a resource, brings many digital technologies, bring many resources, but what is it that affects how students and learners and teachers use those resources? So it's really helpful to have this resource appropriation theory that helps us get into, what stands between the user and the resources, right? And then finally, then, as I've said, Peter Yandrich, the chief editor of Post Digital Science and Education, who was very helpful and optimistic and positive in his invitation to write for the journal, in his encouragement of us while we were developing the article, his many rounds of feedback that he gave us, and also then when we were accepted for publication, we had 2 more reviews from, we had a kind of a more composed review from Peter, plus 2 more reviews from Jeremy Knox in Scotland and Alison Hennessy. So all of those are published in the paper, right? So what do I mean by kaleidoscope? Having shown you this nice image, which is both like batik and it's like a stained glass window. It also, as you see in the open reviews, if you read the open reviews at the end of the article, it was a metaphor that was very warm. UNESCO has this idea in intercultural learning of warm ideas. This is what we need to develop educationally. We need warm ideas, ideas that make us immediately feel warm towards them. Yeah, and we greet those ideas warmly. Yeah? It's just asking, I was just eavesdropping on a conversation with a friend online about how do we translate warm greetings in French. And someone suggested this beautiful word, chaleureusement. It was kind of both warm and joyful. And I think that somehow there was something about this idea of the kaleidoscope that immediately made people feel warm and joyful towards a theory. This is not normally how we feel when we write theoretical articles. Yeah, this warm and joyful feeling. So we think this is a great starting point methodologically, and we propose that it might even be, maybe a bit boastfully, a toolkit, a methodological toolkit. Now, toolkit is maybe too much of a reification, too fancy. What we mean by toolkit is really just a way of working with each other, working through things, working by writing together. And the thing about a toolkit is a tool does not tell you how to use it. So it's a non-prescriptive and holistic and inclusive tool for thinking with many places, many voices and people and positions, situations, many experiences and many theories. So it's not a war of theories, but a kaleidoscope of theories. And it allows us to both examine and critique elements and dimensions of digital inequalities without getting into disagreeable disagreements. So it's a convivial tool and a warm tool. Yeah? So it's really interesting how people kind of reacted to this metaphor of the kaleidoscope. They immediately had memories of being playful, their own childhoods, what they wanted to do for their own children. It was kind of amazing what this little small metaphor did. And it kind of opened up this playful, colorful, and kind of light way of thinking, which is really helpful when you have very heavy problems and quite cumbersome theories to work with. So the point was a way of working with theories that can help us get beyond what Andre introduced as the ideology of digitalism. What is that? That is simply the idea that whatever digital is, it's the solution. Yeah? The ideology of digitalism is a technocentric or technocratic solutionism that says, well, whatever your problem is, technology is the solution. But it didn't even listen to what your problem was in the first place. It's just shoving the solution in place. So that's why it's an ideology, right? It's an idea that promotes itself as a natural belief that, of course, technology is here to help us and to solve all our problems. Yeah. By the way, thank you to the Contra and the technical crew who solved all our technological problems and made it smooth and easy for us today. Because we know that this is not a natural a priori that technology is going to work. There are many challenges. So it gets us beyond this simple idea, this ideology that the digital is here, the digital will save us, the digital is the solution, we don't care about what the problem is. Because that actually prevents us, obstructs us from getting to digital inequalities. So what we want to do is to get beyond that and start thinking about the inequalities and what this digitalism might cover. Digitalism might cover up, which is that there are people who are expected to have more technology. Of course, we want people to have more technology, but we want people to be benefited by it and not be harmed by it. And we want technology to be open in the sense of open for social justice and open to reducing inequalities, being part of our toolkit for reducing inequalities. So we want to use the toolkit to examine and critique different elements and dimensions of digital inequalities and to try and understand what this phrase digital inequalities really means, rather than thinking that we actually know. Because in fact, the more we looked into it, the more there were different meanings. So we couldn't presume that we knew what digital inequalities actually means. Okay. So by inequalities then, we need to begin with some kind of like a common understanding of what do we mean by problems? Why study inequalities? Why care about inequalities? So we care about inequalities when inequalities causes loss and damage to people's well-being, people's existence, people's flourishing. Yeah? So that's why we care about digital inequalities, because there could be harm, there could be losses, there could be a denial of people's well-being that they are entitled to as a matter of justice, social justice. So this is where we really need help in theorizing justice and why we need different dimensions, aspects, and theorizing of justice to give us a richer understanding of what's the injustice that we care about and what should we do about that. What are our responsibilities to guarantee, at least at a minimum, right? So we draw on Nancy Fraser's work on global justice, the tripartite conception of justice, as it's called sometimes. And this is the justice which relates to the distribution or redistribution of resources, the justice that relates to the distribution or redistribution of recognition, because it's not just about resources, it's about people being seen, having a voice, and feeling equalized. And also, there's this third part of the tripartite dimension, which is representation, which is the properly political part of fairness and justice, that we want it to be politically just. And representative of people's voices, needs, and positions. Now, it's more difficult to do justice today because and to do justice and to do education today, because we live in a world that is post-digital, we can say, where the digital and the human have become mixed up. That's what we mean by post-digital, right? So the technology part and the human part have kind of got mixed up, and we can't naturally assume that technology is outside the human, that we can apply to the human as the solution to the human problem. It's just got all mixed up. That's what we mean by post-human. But there's also the situation with knowledge, where we're now in this raising all these questions about artificial intelligence, about AI, about ChatGPT, about cheating, about academic integrity and authenticity, so many questions. And these are because our world of knowledge has become radically destabilized. We don't have this scientific authority that lives in a separate department anymore and then just opinions, which live in a different department. Yeah. We now live in a contested time of post-normal science, where there isn't just one normal, right, that can be dictated to people. There's a lot of contestation. However, we can't just argue until we are blue in the face because we live in a world of crises. So we have urgent decisions and very high stakes. So it's not a pressure on us to do things right. So we're trying to do this tripartite justice with the resources, redistributing them, with recognition, realizing where there's epistemic injustice and where there's, people need to have their contributions recognized. There are different types of knowledge, traditional knowledge, African knowledge, European knowledge, women's knowledge, community knowledge, scientific knowledge has to get together with this. But it is not used to it, finds it difficult. Yeah. And we have high stakes because we have climate chaos, pollution chaos, social polarization, war breaking out, migration crisis. We have many crises. So it's not like this easy world to achieve digital equalization. Difficult. So in this context, we found the warm idea is about different facets of thinking. The kaleidoscope gives us different facets of thinking, and also this idea that you can turn your perspective to see how your thinking is reflected by the other facets of theory, theorizing, examples, and experiences that colleagues are bringing to the table, and collaboratively writing about this to explore and try and understand how there are similarities, differences, aha moments, and also contradictions and tensions between different social understandings, political imperatives, and technological solutions. So let me just talk a little bit about the collaborative writing process, because this is important to the Kaleidoscope as toolkit. So we describe multiple theoretical approaches using the kaleidoscope as a metaphor. Yeah. So the second reviewer, Knox, was very concerned that we would be overly literal in thinking about the kaleidoscope. And he started talking about where the kaleidoscope was invented by this guy in Scotland. And we're like, no, chill out. It's fine. It's just a metaphor. A metaphor is something that we use to multiply and enrich our thinking and open doors in our mind. That's how a metaphor works. Yeah, it's not a bald scientific fact to be illustrated with more bald scientific facts, though it is interesting to know where the kaleidoscope was invented and who invented it and so on and so forth. What Knox's feedback is, don't get too carried away with this because you don't want a singular perspective to overshadow the super complexity of the problem. And we're going, no, mate, that's fine. Chill, don't worry. Yeah? We're not going to get carried away and get monomaniacal about, monoscopic about the kaleidoscope. It's just a metaphor. It's just a warm idea. What the warm idea leads us to is doings and relationships, which the pragmatics and the ethics of writing together and collaborating as academics and academic related practitioners. So there's academic developers, there's technological people, as well as, like myself, academics proper, you could say, right? And, in charge of a discipline, an academic discipline, whatever that is, in my case, sociology. So different kinds of people involved in different practices. And so how does this work, practically speaking, experientially? We started with a call for expressions of interest. People submit a very short response. We try and put as many of the responses together as possible and make sense together as a group of, how does this make sense? Then we go to the next step. We decide who is really serious about proceeding and who is not. They just disappear. The people who are not, they were interested, but then, that was yesterday and today, no, they can't, maybe they don't have the time or they can't make it, the deadlines or whatever it is. The people who are left, with the project, in the project, then get to work with collective crafting. So that is a work of listening and being with your other collaborative authors, reading and responding to their writing, looking at other, being inspired by other people, and being able to constructively comment in a generative way to generate something where the whole is greater than the parts. Yeah, so the collective crafting, and through this we learn how to relate well to each other, to develop, practically speaking, an ethics of collaboration, which is not dictated by an ethics board, but ethics as good relationships. That's what ethics is. And avoiding bad relationships and being thoughtful about equality and inequality in relationships, which means that more senior people who are time poor must still give amount of time. Because less senior people who are earlier in their careers need more feedback, need constructive and generative feedback for us all to work collaboratively and equally, as a whole. And so that's why I call it a response-able research, able to respond to each other through situated interactions where we try to interactively understand what each of us is bringing and to appreciate what each of us brings, because each of us brings something which the others don't have. And navigating the ethics. So it's really interesting to reflect also on this navigational agency, which is what is it that gives people freedom to think about what they're free to think about, but actually freedom to act and have a context where people are free to act. So it also relates to some thoughts I have about the capability theory and navigation of agency. So in this, each person has responsibility and they have agency to actually do something, which is to help to clarify digital inequalities by clearly explaining, giving examples from their experience and knowledge, applying the theory, and also talking openly and writing openly about the advantages and limitations of each theory. So this is an open-minded way of theorizing where we all recognize the limitations also of our own theoretical investments. Because all of us have particular theories that we are keen on, and we want to we want to make sure that we are not just going with the one that we are keen on, and we are minimizing the benefits of the other theoretical perspectives. Okay, so we must have, but at the same time, we have to justify why I think capabilities theory is great. You can't stop me talking about capabilities theory, because at some point somebody's going to have to stop me. Anyway, so just a little bit then. I've already talked a little bit about it, about why post-digital science and education. Because today the digital and the virtual technologies cannot be clearly separately considered from the natural human condition or social life itself. Social life and the natural human condition have become interwoven with digital technology and digital representations. And education is one main area where you can see this happening. Education is a whole life world where post-human and post-digital are the default reality. We can see even in this very book today, which is, present with people, but also virtually our colleagues who are on the Zoom. And important to not notice, that post-digital doesn't mean we're over the digital. Certainly not. The digital is everywhere in our life. But it suggests that we need to get over our amazement that the digital isn't alive. Right? And we need to get over that. And we have to actually now, we accept the digital is in our life. And now we have to think about what's wrong with our life. Moving on with dealing with the problems with the digital. So that's important, and that's in the scope for the Post-Digital Science and Education Journal, because, we want to the editorial statement says that, you know, these new power structures and inequalities, we must pay greater attention to them because they may be less evident, but they may be no less insidious in the way that they're shaping, ruling, governing our infrastructures for living, socio-technical infrastructures, our geopolitics, and our markets. Okay, I just have 5 minutes, but quite a few things. So, okay, I've got 10. Oh, thanks. I have 10 minutes then to quickly just introduce some words about human development and capabilities approach and what light it sheds and what it means to offer equal access, yeah, or equity via digital technology. So for those who don't know anything about human development or capabilities approach, this is a critical area of theory that contains basically a critique of economism and normative critique, and it is concerned with ethically distinguishing means from ends. What does this mean? That means that technology is there to aid you in your human choices. Your humanity is not there to aid the technology. That's simply distinguishing the means from ends. So technology is a means and humans are the ends. It's about the people. It always has to be about the people and about humanity. And theorizing about human capabilities, this is different from the theory of business capabilities or firm capabilities. Why is that? Because business and firm capabilities theory is about value for economism, for economistic reasons, right? Human capabilities is interested in technology and what technology can do for human reasons, I notice. Human capabilities has a justice focus, a human justice focus. It is related to human development, strongly related to the paradigm of human development, as a process of expanding the real freedoms that people enjoy. So when I say it's about people, it's about expanding the real freedoms that you enjoy as human people. So what do we mean by real freedoms? So we're very technical about this. We talk about effective freedom, because freedom is just a word. We're interested in how freedom goes from being a word to being something that you have in your life, in your body, that you somehow enjoy, right? So that is what we mean by real freedoms. And effective freedoms, which are real opportunities. They're not abstract opportunities, but they are real opportunities to do something or to be somebody. So the capabilities approach focuses on opportunities and processes where you do things as people. Things are not done unto you. So Amartya Sen calls this agents, not patients. You're not lying there waiting for things to be done unto you. You are the person who does things, who decides what you want to do and does things. So what is injustice? Injustice is when you're unjustly prevented from being things and doing things that you care about and that you value. Yeah. So, and the other thing we take from Sen is that it's a practical approach. So while the theory looks very abstract and so on, it's actually a very substantively oriented theory. So Sen calls this focusing not on institutional perfection or abstract theoretical perfection, a philosophical perfection that you can achieve while sitting on your fluffy white philosophical cloud. No, it is really thinking about the imperfection that is there in the world. He calls it manifest injustice, and removing or reducing the piles of manifest injustice that are lying around and blackening our existence. Okay? So that's our job. So that's what we mean by focusing on the digital technologies and spaces as technologies and spaces that should enable and not obstruct equitable development of different people's capabilities to do and be what they have reason to value, and as a matter of justice. Now I just have 2 minutes. So just to talk about a few developments and applications furthering human development and capabilities approach. We have some people who work on basic capabilities, they relate this to basic needs sometimes, or to human rights, basic bundle of rights. Then we have Nussbaum's work, which focuses on what she calls central capabilities for a good life. This is a more expansive list of what she calls minimal justice. So although it's expansive, she has quite a high bar for every person to be respected as a human being. There's some who focus on how in the environment of choice, we sometimes choose badly. Even though it seems to be our choice, there are some adaptive preferences or conversion factors that somehow deform our choices. So even when we have liberal theories that focus a lot on choice and the freedom of your choice, sometimes that freedom, there's something wrong with it. Yeah, that freedom can be sort of somehow maladapted or deformed in some. Yes, I can finish. So there's participatory, people who focus on participation and participatory projects, and people who focus on epistemic injustice. So I'm going to just do my last 2 minutes then. I'm not going to go into these in huge detail. These are just more kind of deeper examples of delving deeper into what the human development capabilities community are doing. Some focus on public deliberation, some elaborate the central capabilities, some connect with human rights, some have tried to re-theorize them in a more social and collective way, like Richard Claessen's work on navigational agency, where you're focusing on both autonomy and freedom, but in the wider context. All of us as socially contextualized people, how can our autonomy and freedom be respected? Then there's fantastic work that's been led by South African scholars like Melanie Walker, and together with Spanish and Latin American scholars on participation, epistemic injustice, and collective institutional and public good, specifically in relation to higher education. So just to finish, to go from the kaleidoscope back to inequality, because as the last reviewer in our paper explains, your kaleidoscope metaphor is very charming, but inequality is not charming. Inequality is not beautiful like the kaleidoscope. Inequality is not innocent like the toy that we think of when we think of a kaleidoscope. Yeah. In fact, when we think about technology and progress keep finding new ways for inequality to persist. Not innocent, not beautiful, not charming. Why should we worry about it? Because we're now in a world where, Nancy Fraser says, we're no longer in a world of normal justice, where normal theories of normal justice are going to work for us. This is kind of why we need the kaleidoscope approach, because we're no longer in this normal science, normal justice philosophy of normal fairness situation, because we are in now a context of increasingly abnormal justice. Yeah. And in this, we can't forget, why do we even talk or theorize or write papers about inequality or equality? As Elizabeth Anderson says, there's only one point to philosophizing, theorizing, writing, finding evidence, arguing about equality. The point of equality is to remove oppression. So I just want to finish with this very provocative image of a sculpture by the Danish sculptor Jens Galschiot. And he placed this sculpture partly in the water during one of the COP meetings on climate change. Why did he place it in the water? Partly to bring up this metaphor, the water is rising, the climate is changing, and all the delegates who go to Copenhagen to attend a COP summit will of course go and take a selfie next to the famous statue of the little mermaid. Because you go and take a picture, this sculpture is going to be there, bothering your selfie, right? What is the explanation of the sculpture of a large blind figure of justice who is closing her eyes and purposely blinded while she weighs her justice on a tiny scales. Yeah, but she's sitting on the back of a man. And the text that accompanies it says, I'm sitting on the back of a man. He's sinking under the burden. I would do anything to help him, except stepping down from his back. So the point of theorizing equality or inequality is to remove oppression and to begin to step down from the backs of those who are already overburdened, and to remove the burdens from those who are already the most burdened first. And that would be the simplest way that we could start to address a kaleidoscope of digital inequalities through a kaleidoscope of theories about digital inequalities. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. It was very informative. And I'm sure we're all for anyone questions and comments. So we're going to go over to our Q&A session. I'm going to take the first round. So if you could please just show by raise of hand if you would like to ask a question. Go to start with the Prof.
Nice.
Oh, everyone else would like to ask the question. Okay, Andre is going to go first.
So I just wanted to check whether you perhaps may have been rushed, because I would like to hear the connection between the theoretical kaleidoscope and the notion of digital inequalities in higher education. Whether you can have a clearer message for us there to debate, to discuss.
Sure, let me just go back to the this, yeah. So the theoretical kaleidoscope is a start, it's not the answer, okay? And it was a start for us to work collaboratively with the theories that we have, to think about inequalities in higher education. So we already started from a shared discussion about what was happening in the pandemic. So this really all came out of this discussion and deliberation around what was happening to higher education in the pandemic pivot, and this idea of the magnifying glass on inequalities. That somehow this pivot to the technologies had brought to the fore, not new problems, but really things that we already knew a lot about, which was why can't our technologies or our means of teaching reach the students? Why are students being obstructed from being able to equally enjoy what it is that the technology affords them? So there were a lot of discussions really about how we were doing things, the panic of the pivots, the general moaning about, technology breaking and not being very helpful. But in and amongst that, there was an increasing appreciation of these losses and vulnerabilities, which we already know were in and amongst us, but the pandemic just made it impossible for us to ignore them. Simple things like students who actually couldn't be on campus for some reason, right? And we pivoted between students not being allowed to be on campus for any reason to students being forced to come back to campus, but many of whom could not come back for various reasons, because they couldn't afford accommodation, because they didn't have Wi-Fi. And in the midst of this, in my university, the Wi-Fi was interrupted by a cyber attack, which meant that we didn't have Wi-Fi for about a month, which was disastrous. And we were, basically trying to improvise with lots of different ways of doing things. So part of it was kind of reflection on our own experiences and our own worries, and sharing experiences on what was and wasn't working. Meanwhile, and these were the sort of frontline teachers. And some of the people in the group were not frontline teachers, but educational developers or technological people. So they were thinking about like ideal and non-ideal solutions, while the people who were in frontline of teaching were kind of bringing kind of the news from the front line. So how did we connect? I think we connected through this shared experience and being able to collaboratively and critically reflect on our experiences and our worries, and sharing in particular our worries about how things which were working to include people, right? We pivoted first towards them, to becoming a normal universal practice to implement universal design for learning, for example. But then suddenly we were told, forget that, we're going back to normal. And then some of us were like, but this was working well for our students with disabilities, for the students who have to return to be remotely, attend remotely, and so on. So I think that was where, and all of us are working in the area of higher education. So I think it just came kind of naturally because it's a kind of a home ground for us to be thinking about higher education and the predicaments. But at the same time, the COVID pandemic was a time of great changes strategically and in terms of the kinds of investments that higher education was making. And I suppose we were quite critical, I think, about whether those were the right investments or not, and what the investments ought to be. I think this was also to do with the background project that I was also coming from, which is trying to think more broadly about what investments for greater equity can be incorporated into our conception of how to do education well and public. Yes, quality education.
Oh, okay, thank you. Dr. Jenny, do we have some questions on the Zoom?
Can you take my question and any others?
Is there anyone else who has a question?
I hope I answered, Andre, to an extent.
No, there's
Yeah, we are also puzzling about what has anything to do with this. Yeah.
Thanks, Ine, and thanks, Prof. Khoo. I'm just going to share the question that have come from on the online presentation. Tom Burns just said, beautifully, powerfully, and persuasively presented. Thank you.
That's not a question. That's just self-promotion. Hey.
And then Emna Tadesi Waldegors has asked, as someone who's working on social justice and digital divide issues, I thought we are still coming to grips with the structural complexities of the digital age. In your presentation, you mentioned the post-digital era. What specific factors distinguish it from the digital era? You also noted that in the post-digital era, we must pay greater attention to new power structures and inequalities. Could you elaborate on these new power structures and inequalities that emerged during the post-digital era, and how they differ from those that existed in the digital era?
Yeah, this is an important question. Okay, carry on.
And then, can you take two?
Okay, yes.
And then the second one is from Aslam Fatah, who asked, could you offer some ideas on how digital agency is established across the class range, for example, elite compared to working class students?
Okay, yeah, all right. So I'll answer the post-digital one first. So the fact is that the post-digital era is that we're just, where we get over the idea that there is clearly a digital, a before and an after, before the digital and after the digital, right? And with the post-human as well, yeah, this is about how technology has kind of penetrated our lives as human beings, and is part of the way we're interacting and being as human beings. So does this complicate? I think this is partly part of the question. Does it complicate how we are already approaching this already complexity of inequalities? Well, of course it does, yeah. But we can no longer go back to this ideological digitalism, that digitalism is something that's going to solve the human condition of inequalities or whatever the human condition has problems with. And then the solutionism becomes a kind of an excuse for not actually dealing with the problem, because they're so busy delivering the solution that they've just neglected to ask the question of what actually is the problem. And this is also, if you read the second response by Jeremy Knox, where he warns us against becoming too focused on the kaleidoscope, and trying to get the perfect kaleidoscope view and get it to align with our perfect view, because what we're going to miss is the super complexity of the problem. Now, how do we navigate the complexities? One facet at a time, abutting onto other facets, bringing different facets together and having long conversations. Because actually, when we talk about the super complexity or the many digital inequalities, really we have to start bringing our examples to the table and discussing those examples as if we really care about each example, because each of them is illuminating some facet that the other theoretical perspectives may also be able to reflect some light on. So not to get too overwhelmingly, laboriously into the metaphor. The only way you can deal with inequalities is by accepting that inequalities are complex, but not being defeated by their complexity and starting somewhere, but with friends, because nobody's going to be able to do it on their own. So now I don't know if that is any sort of an answer at all to the question, but that's a start anyway. That there are many different inequalities and we have to think about the different facets, and that's exactly what each of the authors has tried to do, reflecting on what they know best about and the theory that they know well, but also bringing a critical reflection on the advantages and limitations of their particular perspective to bear with the others. In a conversation. Now, Aslam Attar's question. Can you just read it again, Jenny? Because my brain has gone.
Yes, definitely. Let me just add Caroline Kuhn's contributions from the chat, because I think it speaks to the previous question that you were answering, Sue. She's talking about the structures. They're not all new, but they are now trying to be hidden behind the digital, the shiny, the universal solution. And also the owners of the solutions are a big part of the inequality structures, the ones that perpetuate old inequalities. So they need to make us believe that the digital is a panacea. And this also then becomes an invitation for interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity.
Oh, fantastic. That's brilliant. Thanks for that help, Caroline. Because the owners of the technology, there's one of the things that we've noticed is there's two things that are happening. One of which is monopoly. So distributed and different technologies are giving way to monopolistic commercial technologies, becoming very centralized, and they're making a lot of money on us, without and gaining a lot of control, because it's this platformization of the digital, which are the platforms which are owned and operated by a very small number of for-profit operators. The other thing that's happening, which also bears on inequalities, is what Laura Chernovitz's group called the unbundled university, where the central kind of institutional and administrative and infrastructural functions of the university are becoming outsourced and unbundled. I know you are also doing insourcing as a kind of a remedy for that. But all the time, I feel in the fabric of the university that I inhabit and that I also visit a kind of what I would call a termite capitalism. You think that, the room, the furniture, everything's very solid, but all the time you hear this little munching noise, and that somehow your world, your solid public university world of sharing knowledge is getting alone and maybe not solid. So there's two things that are happening that I think make the inequalities more problematic and may, as Caroline says, contribute directly to the inequalities themselves. Because as they demand more money for their solutions, there's less money for us to support students to use the technology Oh, Aslam, sorry, I didn't, the class thing.
That's fine, just gonna find it. Could you offer some ideas on how digital agency is established across the class range, i.e. elite compared to working class students?
So that's part of the whole conversation on why we should, in capabilities, think about agencies. Agency is very important. Yeah. So what do we mean by digital agency? There should be an autonomy aspect, so that the learner, the teacher, has certain things that they want to do and can freely think about different things that they want to do, right? But they also need freedom in a context. So in that, you can think about what you want to do, but can you achieve it? I can think about plugging this thing into that, but if I don't have the right connector, I cannot achieve it. If I live in an environment of choice where I cannot achieve, because the collective environment of choice does not allow me to achieve what it is I thought about, then my agency is going to be frustrated. So how this can speak to class is specifically by thinking about what the role of class has in affecting this navigational agency or capabilities of each learner and of teachers. So it's, sorry, Aslam, I've just answered your question with another question, but it's to ask that question of what do we do to foster first this ability for people to even think of choices, their autonomy, because you don't have autonomy, you can't think of it. And also their actual substantive freedom to be able to act upon that and not be frustrated. The worst thing is you've thought of something that's going to make you really great, right? But something is frustrating. The other aspect that relates to class is around identities and horizontal inequalities and also adaptive preferences, where people who come from a lower socioeconomic class background adapt their choices. They adapt their autonomous choices to a deformed understanding. So their freedom is deformed. Their freedom to achieve, they say, well, I would like to go to this university, but this type of university is not really for my type of people. So my choice is not to choose to go to that. And so in capabilities theory, we're quite worried about this. And we're trying to think hard about how education can overcome this way in which our context, our educational context, tends to reinforce this deformation of choices rather than to make those choices really free. So I know this is a very generic and unsatisfactory answer to a very important question, but it's the best that I can do for now. I saw a hand somewhere there.
We have two more questions.
Oh, two more.
Then
Okay.
we'll take the last 10. Oh, now we have 4 questions.
Oh my gosh.
Greetings, everyone. I'll be reading the comments and questions from the online audience. So this one's first from Catherine Cronin. She says, useful comments, thank you. Also, rather than describing a different era, the descriptor post-digital refers to a different lens or way of theorizing phenomena such as power, injustice, etc. And then we've got a question from Sukaina Waliji. I'm sorry for pronouncing it wrong. Is there any possibility of a synthesis of the theories or the Kaleidoscope inherently about discrete elements and different perspectives to bear on a phenomenon? And then we've got another comment from Delecia Davids. The post-digital, post-human theories emphasize a strong look beyond the person or subject and emphasizes the agency of other human beings with that the relations between technology and people. Can you share some implications of this on educational research, particularly those that have a social justice underpinning? And the last one from Tom Burns, sorry to overwhelm you. Tom Burns, if the post-digital era means that we are all digital now, then yes, we must integrate thinking about digital education with our thinking about radical or liberatory education per se.
Okay, so first, Catherine. Well, that's really more a comment, really, I think. Yeah, but I really love Catherine's work. And this idea of the post-digital and the post-human is not to take anything away from the human, quite the opposite. So I take the post-digital and the post-human to be a profoundly humanizing moment or turn of mind. To think not so much about the technology, but about humanity. And I love Catherine's notion of navigating the marvelous, I think she calls it, and through the world of open resources, open application. It had so much inspiration from her. I really am so grateful to Catherine for her work. Now, Sukaina, can we synthesize? Go right ahead. Synthesize away. Of course you can synthesize. And we only brought a few facets together. That's what humans do. If you're not taught that theory is a religion or a cult, but theory is just a bunch of tools that you can use to help yourself to think better, then yes, of course, a synthesis is what human mind will want to do. Put things together into some kind of pattern that makes sense to you. So yes, of course. And I think it depends on what the objective of your thinking is. And that's why I wanted to bring it back to removal of oppression. And I think this, if you can bring thinking, theorizing together in a way that can meaningfully begin to remove even a single atom of, oppression of any of those types. Yeah, the oppression through the misrecognition of people, oppression through the maldistribution of resources, oppression of the lack of representation of people's political voices, then a synthesis is welcome. For Tom, liberatory education, of course, let's have it. Let's be having it. And I love the work that Tom and the Sandras do in the area of critical and liberatory education, particularly in the way they bring in playfulness and artfulness. It's beautiful and it's fun. Let's be having more of that as well. And in being playful and fun, it is liberating us from this chains of expectation that theorizing, doing theory, learning in higher education should be dull and boring, not for a minute. Yeah? They have fun and laughs, and that is great. So thanks, Tom, for your work this week. Did I answer everybody? I think there was 4 and I seem to answer 3.
All right, thank you. My name is Elijah. So my question is around the AI technology that has took over, the whole world. Yes. So with it being in place right now, what is and I would like to believe Prof. Andrew Kidd would advise on this. How does our future look like in higher education with the AI technology having it took over to a point where even us as students, we're very lazy in engaging in research, critical thinking and learning, so how does our higher education, the future of our higher education look like with this thing having it took over? And also, what are the measures of the implementations the universities, can use in pursuit to maybe to combat the implications of the AI technology in higher education? Because I believe it's the white elites. What are they trying to achieve with this? What informed this, the establishment of the AI technology in the world that we're living in right now? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Elijah, for that question, which is not very easy to answer. Oh, take that one, okay. Another question. Yeah, I think you will. Okay, we'll take three if we can.
Okay, so, did you say David's question? I think that was the one that you didn't get to last answer, so I'm just gonna restate it, if that's fine.
Okay, yes, yes.
So she says the post-digital / post-human theories emphasize a stronger look beyond the person / subject and emphasizes the agency of other than human things when studying relations between technology and people. Can you share some implications of this on educational research, particularly those that have a social justice underpinning?
Okay. So I'm going to answer, yeah, I'm definitely going to answer that one first, yeah? And then I'll answer Elijah.
So, is there another question?
Yeah.
Yes, I will. It's a comment more than a question. Prof. First and foremost, I appreciate your work. I was told you yesterday, especially about the Kaleidoscope approach and how you dissect your narrative on digital inequality. But now I just want to bring it back to higher education at large and probably give another view of it, or a more contextual. In South Africa, we have the highest form of inequality, and the education sector itself stems as a pillar to progress this inequality as we exist in a capitalist mode of organizing society. So which means that education sector itself must and can be or is problematized because it behaves in a certain way, access, who enters it, how it behaves and treats people who are in it, and the aftermath of how it the relationship between it and the labor market. So when now we introduce technology, the inequality of technology, we need to take into account then who then is within the institutions of higher learning in this higher education sector. Majority, it is students who come from the working class and the poor backgrounds, who then in majority come from schools who are under 1 to 3, which those are the poorest from townships and rural areas, which now it gives us and informs us to say that the problem of inequality in respect to technology, it doesn't start also in the higher education sector. That must be addressed because you can't jump in a student who technological resources subjects, but then in their background they were previously disadvantaged. They have no facilities and resources. So now, what then is the approach of your publication and start in a contextual manner? Then what is the broad or broad intervention of your publication in redressing the relations between the external factors of the higher education, of inequality in higher education in relation to there's a lot of thinking actually, but I'm not sure if you heard me correctly, but then yeah, my question is shaped in that manner.
Okay. So I'm going to answer in the order of the post-digital, post-human question first, then Elijah's question about AI being everywhere and what to do about it, and then your question, okay? Organize. Okay, so on the post-digital and post-human, I really want to emphasize that this focus on the agency of other than human things or beings should not detract from the fundamental objective of education, which as a right of human beings is oriented towards the development of human beings. So it's an anthropocentric perspective, right? And I don't want to get dragged into the technologic, the kind of like the co-determinism of technology and the kind of the usurpation of the human, of techno-determinism over the human. Because I believe education is profoundly a humanistic and basically foundationally a humanistic concern that humans do with other humans, for humans. And therefore, it's not done. The post-digital is accepting that we live with the digital and the technology, the post-human also, but it is not there to detract from the objectives of education as a humane and humanizing. It's a very normative view that I have, and many people will not agree with it. Yeah, granted. That's my perspective, simply because I'm personally normatively not attracted to techno-determinism, and do not wish, because that leads to the opposite of a human development capabilities perspective, which makes this ethical distinction between means and ends and sees technology as a means and never as an ends. Yeah? So still, even though technology is here to stay, it is with us. And let me now just address Elijah's point there about what do we do with AI being everywhere, taking over. It has taken over. No, it hasn't. AI hasn't taken over. AI exists. Yeah. AI is a creation of human beings, large language learning models, large digital visual learning models. And they are just one of many models that human beings have generated as technologies to make their lives more convenient, save time, so on and so forth. How should we deal with it? Well, we should deal with it, number one. Yeah. So ostrich approach, I don't think will work. Yeah, burying your head in the sand and saying, you know, AI just go away. It's not going to help, because we're already in the post-digital, post-human, as you say. AI is everywhere. So what are we to do about this? Well, we have a technology to deal with it. It's called critical thinking. It's called learning, right? And in fact, I would already say to my students, if you want to use AI, please do. But please tell me what you asked AI to do for you. And then you may use it freely. And then please give me a little 100 or 300 words feedback on how you found the AI. Right? So then the student will respond, dear professor, I thought I may use the AI, and I thought I would use it creatively to generate an image of my presentation. But I found that its images were very ugly and simplistic. So anyway, I decided to just present a normal poster. This is an actual response. So how would we deal with it? We deal with it in a way that fosters critical and creative thinking, that enables the students to be in charge and to remember that you are the ones giving the instructions to the AI. AI, please generate an image of this. Please generate a text of this. Then apply your critical thinking. Please generate a text evaluating how well you think the AI did the job. And can you explain whether you could actually do the job a bit better? Because actually, naturally, the student did it already. They said, you know, professor, I found the thing that AI generated was not very interesting. Yeah. Oh, you know, I asked it to do this thing, and then I was shocked because AI made up the references and it lied. Right? So this thing that AI does is say, you know, make up this, write this assignment for me, and you know, give Professor Khoo some references also. So then they'll say, oh, Professor Khoo is, you know, a well-known specialist in mushrooms or something. You know, they're a complete like fabrication, because you know it's a language model. It's not a knowledge model. So as long as it is grammatically and syntactically, you know, credible, it thinks it's done a good job. And you're like, but this is nonsense. It's ridiculous. Oh, this is not very good. So it's only as good as a bunch of other language that's out there. That's not the same as learning. So it's learning language, but you're learning subjects. That's a difference. Yeah, you're learning an actual knowledge area. So focusing on not on the technology, but on the creativity, on the poiesis, on what students are doing when they make their assignment, and being more creative in designing the assignments to give students more mastery over the AI. So the AI is not the master robot, right? The AI is just a tool that you ask to do things like check your spelling or check your grammar. We already use AI to do that. So that is fine. We use AI to, give us results on Google, but we should know that we shouldn't just simply use the first result that Google gives us. Because Google gives us results that people have paid it to show our eyes. Right? So we need critical thinking and critical appraisal and contextual thinking around how we use AI and put an emphasis on academic authenticity. So we need authentic assessments and authentic learning. And an authentic student will always prefer that over like you say, students are lazy. Well, sometimes students have to be lazy, but not mostly. Mostly students want to learn. So you get out what you put in, basically. And if you have a reflection on what you asked it to do and a reflection on what it did for you, then you've learned something. You have maybe achieved what the assessor wanted. Okay, so.
But Elijah made a point with regard to the culture of reading.
Reading?
Yeah.
Well, I can't help you there. You ought to read. No, reading is, I'm a nerd, so I think reading is fun, but that maybe it's not for everybody. I agree with that, so perhaps. Now, the reflection on South Africa and the highest inequality, whilst having an education system that is tasked with transformation, this is the big one. Yeah. So what should higher education do? The first thing I think that makes it difficult for higher education not to follow this trajectory, this trend of increasing inequality, is to decommodify higher education as much as possible. So even if, like in the interim, we have to pay, right, so that you can have open access, is to normalize public common good academic knowledge production that can be shared and reused for the creativity and scientific advancement of our communities. Our scientific communities, not for the profit of small, large monopolistic corporations. So decommodification and open educational research and resources, which are not just about paying this journal for open access, but it's a whole philosophy of decommodification for access and social justice. I think this is one of the most important things that we can do. But in order for that openness to translate into social justice, we need this tripartite model of justice to understand, are we going and to check ourselves? Are we actually redistributing the resources? Are we actually giving recognition to the disrecognized, the proper recognition? Yeah? Are we giving voice to those who are struggling to get a voice? Yeah? But at the same time, education and politics are not the same arena. They are complementary, maybe, sometimes not very complementary, but education is a specific arena where we are here to create knowledge and learn. This is the greatest weapon that we have against commodification of knowledge and monopolization and growing inequality, is the fundamental basic fact that knowledge is not scarce. Unlike everything else in neoliberalism and capitalism, knowledge increases the more we use it. It does not become scarce. Knowledge improves in quality the more you circulate and share it. It is the opposite of this fascistic idea of the tragedy of the commons. Yeah? It is naturally abundant, because if you thought of some cool idea, the first thing you're going to do is go and tell your friends. You're not going to keep your cool idea under a bushel. What's the point of having a cool idea if you just hide it away? You're scared that your friend is going to steal it. You can't steal ideas. Share ideas. The more you share ideas, the better the quality and quantity of ideas that will be. That's the crazy thing about knowledge, right? It's just super abundant. It's everywhere. It's the first thing that we can do and the best thing to overcome it.
Thank you so much, Prof. Khoo, and everyone for the Q&A session. Thank you to our online audience also. We have unfortunately come to the end, and I'd like to invite Dr. Samuel Bosir to do the close for us.
Okay, thank you so much, Su-Ming. The organizers kept me very brief. They gave me specific instructions. Mine is to give a vote of thanks, not for keynotes. So I will not be doing that. But probably I'll pause and first of all say from where I'm seated, and thanks for the invitation to participate in the seminar to CriSHET. In my role as the Chief Information Officer of the university, one of the things that we've just been developing is our digital transformation strategy. Just listening and participating in this conversation has put a new lens, and a very important lens, in how I look at what we're doing and how that informs what we do post-COVID and so on. But also sitting as one of the members of management, listening to some of the conversations that we've been grappling with. I was quite encouraged. We talk about transdisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and the approach that was taken in your paper was really giving effects to that. And I also saw immense research opportunities. Imagine all of this new, it's not new really, but what is currently topical, the post-digital era and its implications, especially to higher education. Jenny, I'm coming to the vote of thanks. Because you're wondering. So I'd like first and foremost to thank Prof. Su-Ming Khoo for sharing the seminar work that together with colleagues you were able to put together. And secondly, actually making it accessible. You paid for it so that we can all access it. I'm looking forward to downloading the same because I believe it is quite a thought-provoking piece of work. I'd also want to...
Maybe if Sue a moment before you go to the next one.
Thank you very much.
I just want to say that the open access publication was granted by my university's Office for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. It's the first time they've used an equality, diversity and inclusion grant in this way, I think, as a staff development grant, but this is how it develops.
We really needed to truncate that, punctuate that with a round of applause. And actually, more importantly, talking about accessible. This is quite a dense piece of work and intervention, but the way it's been presented was accessible to all of us and to all the participants. So thank you for that once again. This will not be possible without the participation of all present, physically and those virtually. I normally weight the interest in a lecture from the Q&A and the participation. I think we were just, if we're using boxing language, saved by time, otherwise if we had more time, there will be more interrogations coming from the floor. So thank you for those who attended, and I want to thank Dr. Jenny Bukria, Fortune Juaka, the coordinators of this event. I think very well done. Tlangi Nyati for the poster design and the social media work in promoting and creating awareness of this seminar. Wimiso Okapo for the admin, of course, supporting the team. I'd like to thank Tasha Pereira and other colleagues from the business school that assisted with the venues and all the other related logistics, catering and so on. I'd like to, feels like I'm thanking myself, but my colleagues in ICT, the integrated media control. I'm glad that it has gotten to a point where CriSHET no longer asks me for help. We just find ourselves in meetings. So thank you so much to you and the technical crew. Last but not least, of course, Before I come to last but not least, let me also, I'll be remiss if I don't acknowledge with a round of applause due to our program coordinator, Sine. Yes, I was then coming to say, last but not least, I'd like to thank our DVC, ETP, Engagement Transformation Portfolio. I like to say that you're making, for me, the T is capital T, you know, the transformation side, the transformative side, for sharing your network of intellectuals across the world, bringing them here, sharing their thought-provoking work, and just promoting inter and transdisciplinary in your own subtle way. And of course, for the thoughts that has gone into this seminar and what comes out of it, I'd like to thank you most sincerely. Thanking everyone for your participation, and on account of that, I will hand over to the program director. I hope that I'll still be able to remain in the good books of Genuine Group from the perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for attending. We have come to the end of our seminar. Have yourselves a lovely evening.